The warehouse district of Riverside had been sleeping when the tactical team arrived at 2 a.m., their vehicles moving through fog-wrapped streets like predators stalking prey. David Chin sat in his small office on the third floor of the converted mill building, reviewing blueprints for a community housing project. His wife, Margaret, worked the night shift at the psychiatric hospital across town, a night when she should have been here, reviewing her research notes on trauma recovery, but the hospital had called her in for an emergency. The sound started as a distant rumble, then erupted into chaos below. The stairwell door burst open, and 6 figures in dark tactical gear flooded onto the third floor. David's first instinct was architectural. He catalogued the entry points, the load-bearing walls, the emergency exits. 20 years of military engineering training kicked in before his mind could catch up to the danger. Down on the ground. Now, an officer screamed, pointing an assault rifle directly at David's desk. David moved deliberately, dropping to his knees with his hands visible. "I'm unarmed. My wife works at Riverside Psychiatric. She's not here tonight." The lead officer, a woman with a scar running down her left cheek, approached the desk. Officer Torres, her nameplate read. Behind her came another man, younger, whose hand already rested on his holster. "This is for the illegal construction permits," Torres announced, though David had never heard of any such thing. His projects were all properly licensed, reviewed, and approved. The younger officer moved too quickly, a stumble, and nervous energy. His finger tightened on the trigger. The shot erupted through the small office like thunder. David's desk was suddenly painted with blood. Margaret. His Margaret, she'd arrived early for the night shift, decided to surprise him with coffee. She was standing in the doorway, her work badge still clipped to her sweater. When the bullet found her, David moved with decades of ingrained precision. He was beside her in 2 seconds, his hand pressing against the wound beneath her collarbone. With the other, he dialed 911, his voice steady despite the howling in his chest. "This is David Chen at the Riverside Mill offices. I have a gunshot victim requiring immediate medical attention. My wife has been shot. I am applying pressure to a thoracic wound. Medics are en route," the dispatcher confirmed. "Officers are preventing their entry," David said clearly, watching as Torres and her team moved to block the stairwell door. "I am unarmed and not resisting. My wife requires immediate emergency care." The minutes stretched like broken time. Margaret's breathing grew shallow. David kept talking to her, to the dispatcher, to the officers, maintaining control through pure force of will. When the paramedics finally arrived, David's hands were soaked with Margaret's blood. He looked directly at the younger officer, the one who'd fired, badge 2847. Name, Patterson. He memorized everything. The tremble in Patterson's hands. The sweat on his forehead. The way Torres deliberately avoided his eyes. Margaret was lifted onto a stretcher and rushed away. David followed, still covered in blood, still moving with that impossible calm. At the hospital, while Margaret fought in surgery, David sat in the waiting room watching a televised press conference. Captain Linda Hewitt of the Riverside Police Department stood at a podium, her uniform immaculate, her expression grave. "We were executing a warranted investigation into fraudulent building permits at the warehouse district," she began. During the entry, a suspect became combative, creating a dangerous situation that tragically resulted in injury to a civilian. The lie was smooth, practiced. David watched as edited footage flickered across the screen, darkness, flashlights, shouting. But the moment before Margaret was shot never appeared. "Officers followed all proper procedures," Hewitt continued. "Body camera footage confirms their professionalism in an extremely volatile situation." David's civil engineer's mind began to work. He knew how to deconstruct flawed blueprints. Now he would deconstruct this architecture of lies. A nurse handed him a notepad. His phone buzzed. An unknown number. "This is Keisha Morrison, Riverside Investigative News. I know what they're hiding. Don't talk to internal affairs. Call this number from a secure line." In a small coffee shop near the courthouse, Keisha spread documents across a corner table. She was precise, careful, a journalist who'd spent 15 years learning how corruption moves through systems. "The warrant was created after your unit was hit," she said, sliding over time-stamped documents. "This one was signed at 2:47 a.m. The raid began at 2:12. David studied the metadata, his architect's eye catching the digital fingerprints. They reversed the process. Built the paperwork to fit what they'd already done. "There's more," Keisha continued. "I have a source inside the department. They're saying the real target wasn't your office. It was your building." She explained about the Riverside Development Corporation, a massive urban renewal project that required clearing the warehouse district. David's mill sat in the middle of the planned route. He'd been fighting their buyout offers for 2 years, refusing to sell. "They needed a reason to justify clearing your block," Keisha said quietly. "A crime scene, property damage, whatever it took. David thought of Margaret lying in a hospital bed, fighting for her life because his address had been an obstacle in someone's development timeline. Over the next week, David methodically documented everything. At night, while Margaret recovered in ICU, he returned to the mill with forensic precision. He photographed blood patterns, measured breach points, collected shell casings. Every detail was logged with GPS coordinates and timestamps. In his office, he found something the tactical team had overlooked, a radio communication log jammed under a filing cabinet. The timestamps contradicted the official report. There were messages about securing the scene and waiting on confirmation that placed the shooting exactly where he suspected. His military background had taught him one crucial skill: how to read crime scenes the way others read books. He compiled everything into encrypted files. Photographs, measurements, communication logs, property records. Then he reached out to contacts from his military days, people who understood what happened when institutions decided their survival mattered more than truth. Margaret was released from the hospital after 12 days. She was weak but determined. On the night she came home to their temporary housing at a colleague's apartment, they sat on the small balcony watching the city lights. "What happens now?" Margaret asked. David showed her the video their daughter, Lisa, had created. Imani had become a documentary filmmaker. Now she'd taken his evidence and transformed it into something undeniable. Split-screen footage showing the exact moment the younger officer's body camera turned away, and when it turned back, a previously unseen gun sat on David's desk. "That gun wasn't there," David said. "I named every object on that desk during the 911 call. Blueprints. Coffee cup. Desk calendar. No weapon." Margaret watched the video twice, then looked at her husband. "So what's next?" "We tell the truth," David said. "Publicly. Where they can't bury it." The old civic center had hosted community forums since the 1970s. David reserved it for what he called simply, the public accounting. The night of the gathering, the space filled with people David had never expected to see together. Engineers who'd worked on his projects. Margaret's colleagues from the hospital. Veterans from his old unit. Community activists. Residents who'd been threatened with displacement by the Development Corporation. Lisa managed the live stream from stations positioned throughout the room. Within minutes, thousands were watching online. David stood at the podium and began systematically dismantling the official narrative, displayed the warrants metadata. The radio logs. The property development plans with his warehouse marked in red. The financial records showing payments from Riverside Development to the police department's Special Operations Fund, played the full 911 call, his own voice describing each item on the desk with architectural precision. Then he showed the video. The moment the gun appeared where there had been empty space, the room held its breath. When the doors at the back burst open, federal agents entered with quiet authority. The FBI's Civil Rights Division had been contacted. What started as a local shooting had become a conspiracy investigation. Officers began making arrests. Captain Hewitt. The district attorney. The Development Corporation CEO. Patterson was led away, his hands shaking. 6 months later, the Chin Community Health and Justice Center opened on the site of the original warehouse. The building David had been designing, the affordable housing unit, had been transformed into something larger, a space for community healing, civic education, and institutional accountability. Margaret worked as the clinic's director, treating patients displaced by the city's forced development projects. Veterans like David taught seminars on documentation and transparency. The reforms came slowly but steadily. The city council passed new regulations on warrant procedures. A civilian oversight board was established. The Development Corporation was dissolved. One former officer, a man named Garcia who'd questioned the raid from the beginning, now worked as a volunteer at the center. He'd lost his badge but found his conscience. In the center's main hallway, there was a wall of photographs, not of those who'd committed the injustice, but of the community members who'd refused to let truth be buried. David stood there one morning as Margaret arrived for her shift. She still moved carefully, the physical scars healing slower than the emotional ones. She touched his arm. "We're still here," she said. David nodded, looking at the photographs, at the building they'd fought for. "And the truth is still here too. That matters." Above them, sunlight streamed through the tall windows, illuminating dust motes and the visible reality of a hard-won justice. The door remained open.